My name is Dylan, and I have been telling street stories for over 15 years. I usually talk to the kids or young adults who are at risk of drug abuse and peer pressure. I start off with a series of fast-paced escapades, which lead some kids into changing their traditional playground of gangs into something positive. My stories follow their adventures from selling or using drugs and alcohol. This helped them to become entrepreneurs, choreographers, and songwriters. Also sports managers, and military special forces, even investigative detectives. Raw Productions, Reach Out and Witness Productions presents Hoodzville Rap. Written and produced by Larry W. Keys. This movie is about peer pressure and its consequences. Some people never have to go through it. But there are some who go through it and wish they didn't have to. It takes all types of people to become a role model, depending on the situation, time, and age. The setting, plot, and characters of this movie have been chosen by circumstances of living in a drug-infested city. I'm not here to glorify the situation but only to identify the situation. Because it's one thing to live it and another to survive it. Praise the Lord. I'm glad to see that you guys are serious about my stories. Pass the word, let those guys in the hood know that this ain't no joke. Let's pick up where we left off at, okay. Careful not to take his eyes off the guys who were coming up to the wall in front of him. Jim said, "Hit 'em man, for that mess he got us into with G-Man." Chink smiled and said, "Come on man, let's go." And looked over at Hector and said, "Later Hector." Hector said, "Okay man." That night they sold the dope only to get high off of pills and syrup. Chink said in a half nod, "Man, Hector gonna be a dope fiend soon." Jim said, "I know man, there's nothing we can do about that." They looked at each other and shook their heads feeling sorry for him. As time went on at school, the 9th grade was about to end. Jim used to watch the other kids go in the bathroom and shoot up drugs. He used to brag about how he could take pills and feel better than them. He used to joke with them about them being junkies and show them his veins and laugh at them. Then before the school year was out, seemed like the pills started to get scarce in South Hoodsville. Within those few months he lost his pistol in a crap game and his little crew had falling apart. Chink was in training school, and Hector was hooked on shooting dope. Jim and some others used to go uptown and investigate about where they heard the slammers, the pills, were sold. It got harder and harder to find those slammers, and when they did, the prices would go up. They spent more money traveling to get them than they'd pay for them. Jim was edgy and mad at them goddamn junkies, because they were high and nodding all the time. A new kid moved on the block, proved himself in fighting others, and Jim found out he was twirling dope for a crew uptown, northwest Hoodsville. Jim kept away from him until it seems like everywhere Jim went he was there. Then one day they were talking, and Jim asked him why he didn't look like he was high off of that stuff. He said, "'Cause I'm a businessman, and you got to know how much to do and not overdo it, shawty." Then it dawned on Jim that that's what he been doing the whole time with pills, until it caught up with him. Now he have a pill habit. This guy name was Willie, and he introduced Jim to shooting heroin, and Jim loved it. Till death do we part. He begins to shoot dope whenever he could. He had already started a life of crime dealing with breaking and entering and stick-ups, but, for this high he would die for. This didn't happen just like that, all at once, but, with peer pressure and Jim's reputation on the line. Selling drugs was a big factor, and Jim, without his pills, he found it hard to cope. It all started when Jim got this idea. What could it hurt? One shot of dope. And Willie was considered an expert in Jim's eyes. Then Jim thought, besides, I'd mess him up or give him a hard way to go in a fight. The next time Jim saw him, Jim snorted some dope while Willie was trying to talk him into shooting dope with him. Jim didn't like that snorting. It tasted nasty going down his throat and turned his stomach like he had to vomit. Finally Jim gave in. 2 weeks later, Willie drew up a little bit in an eyedropper with a rubber band around the rubber piece on the eyedropper. The needle stared Jim in the face. He thought he was going to faint. Jim held out his arm and turned his head. Willie stuck the needle in Jim's armpit and Jim thought he jerked cause Willie said, "Don't move." Then Jim thought somebody was coming into the rec center bathroom. All of a sudden Jim felt like he turned into a monster. He started vomiting everywhere. Jim fell into the wall. He grabbed his throat and stomach. He looked at Willie and saw 3 Willies at one time. Jim wanted Willie to keep still because he was going to mess him up for trying to kill him. Willie grabbed Jim and started talking stuff like, "Look cool, Jack. Not so loud, man." Jim wanted to swing at one of their faces, but he didn't know which one to swing on. Jim blurted out, "Where you at, shawty? Hold still, I'm gonna knock you the hell out." As he began to vomit once again and pointing at one of Willie's 3 faces. A few minutes went past and his stomach calmed down, Willie's face focused and the high was there. For Jim, at that moment he felt like he had a rubber band tightened around his head and the tighter it was the higher he got. When it loosened up everything was okay, he was at peace. No problem, people could call him a name and he would answer, "You're right, whatever you say. Just don't blow my high." He could float across the room with rhythm. Hold up, hold up. This is crazy to believe that this high could be that good. This was the beginning of his end. Why would you send your body through all that, just to get high? Your body is your temple. And we should respect that. Jim was in love with this high and made up his mind right then and there that this was the high for him. He thought, yeah, this is only the beginning. Then Jim and Willie start traveling uptown together. They ran into pimps, prostitutes, and big-time dope dealers. People knew Willie cause they called him Little Willie, because of his father who was locked up for twirling drugs in that area. Jim was surprised that Willie knew all those people and was proud to be in his crew on the block. Jim soon remembered that he had to earn respect from others, so he got into fights on purpose so people would remember him. How bad he was. That year went by so fast, and it dawned on him that he was all alone once again. His boy Willie had just got locked up and Chink went back to train in school again because they were trying to re-up, get more heroin, and someone must have been snitching because people were getting knocked off left and right. So, it became too hot to scoop, and dope got scarce for a while, but Jim had his own stash that lasted for a while. He thought it would last until everybody came out of hiding and start selling dope wholesale again. Meanwhile, he was waiting for the corners to fill up with people again, but no one was selling anything and he began to get high more and more. He found himself alone, most of his friends or crew was gone and he ran out of dope because he was spending up all his money showing off. Instead of investing his money while waiting on a new shipment to come in on the corners uptown, he was living large and partying all the time. Then one day he found himself strung out on his own drugs. He tried to save the last little bit he had and so he became that guy who he teased and disrespected and his label for them was, a junkie. On one particular morning, Jim woke up late to begin his hustle for that day. Alarm clock says 11:10 a.m., oh, no. Jim jumped up cussing and fussing. Nah, dag, man. Okay, okay. He thinks to himself as he puts on his pants and sweatshirt. The no number 10 Valiums he took last night just put him to sleep, so he wouldn't be ill. Sick from not having some dope, rushing to get his pistol from under his mattress, he sizes up the length of the pistol under his sweatshirt as he slides the pistol in his dip. Living the life of a dope dealer was fun while it lasted, but now it was back to basics, get that blast. Jim thought, where is Mickey when you need him? Then he thought of quitting all this mess, but first, he needs one more blast to think any further about that. In the mirror picking his afro, Jim practices breaking down his mug. He throws on a knit hat and dark brown jacket. His mother says, "Boy, you better eat something before you go out." Jim in a daze, he was thinking of what stick up and when. The bill collection man had already been his way this time of day. He pours a bowl of cereal, eats half, and was out the door before his mom could say something else. Walking down the street, he spotted a bill collection man in a white car driving up the street. He started grinning, then took a sharp right and ducked behind the wall and peeped to see which way the car went. Then, like a shot in the dark, Jim ran across the back way of the houses. As he ran, he thought he would meet the car, but the car turned right and went down the hill. Jim ran across the street behind the other houses, then down the hill. By the time Jim reached the bottom of the hill, the car made a left and went up the other street. Jim, out of breath, said to himself, "Shoot, goddamn." When Jim looked around, he was in back of Lander's house. He stood there for a minute and thought about knocking on Lander's door. Lander's sister Dee Dee was hanging out clothes and she saw him run over there. Then she said curiously, "Hey, what you run across the back for and stop like that? 'Cause you ain't jogging nowhere." Jim said, as she begins to laugh. "Shut up, girl, where is your brother at?" Jim was tired and wasn't for no stuff, he has to get a shot of dope soon before the Valiums wear off. "He's upstairs, call him if you want him," she said with an attitude while rolling her eyes with one hand on hip. Then Jim gave out a loud whistle, once then twice. Lander lifts his window up and said, "Was up," and waved Jim to come on in. Lander's mother met Jim at the door as he eased it open. "Lander told me to come in, Miss Hawkins," Jim said in fear of his life. She lifted up her head from a bag on the kitchen table while peeling potatoes with a knife in her hand pointing at Jim. She said, "He don't pay no rent around here, and don't you forget it." She waved the knife in little circles, while pointing. Jim said in a hurry, "Yes, ma'am." Then Lander came down the steps and said while smiling at his mom, "Come on in, Jim, I'll get my jacket." They walked from the kitchen back door to the living room, giving each other a 5 slap. "Mama mad at me for beating up Jack Rabbit last night." Then Lander punched Jim in the chest and said, "Let's go, man." Now, Lander was a thick-boned, stocky, dark-skinned dude with big eyes. He would fight every chance he got to prove himself throughout Hoodzville because he was the only boy in the family with 2 sisters to protect. Jim threw up his guards and said, "I'm ill, man, don't be messing with me, here shawty." Then Jim lifts up his sweatshirt and said, "Now do it again." Lander was bouncing up and down throwing punches, like he was shadow boxing. Then he said, "Let's go knock a fool out, while I'm still pumped up." As he continued to shadow box out the door, they just strolled up the street. Then Jim said, "There that chump goes." Just then a white car rolled past them and went up the street. Lander said, "You talkin' about me, chump," and jabbed at Jim. Jim swayed to one side, ducking Lander's intended punch, and said, "Nah, chump, I'm talkin' about that bill collector." Then he pointed to the car. Lander said, "Up the pool room, Rainbow got some good dope." Just then, the ice cream truck rolled up the corner ahead of them to serve some people. Lander said, "Why we got to chase a bill collector when the damn ice cream truck is right there?" "Damn, Lander, you right for once in your life." Then Jim punched Lander in the side and started trotting toward the ice cream truck. Then he shouted as the last customer left the truck, "Hey wait, mister, hey wait." The truck waited for them to catch up. "Don't make me shoot you. You know what it is. Give it up." As Jim reached in his dip and then pointed the gun at a man and then a woman, waving it back and forth. While Jim was saying the words, Lander jumped up on the truck and began to push the man to one side to separate him from the woman. The woman started crying. Lander told her to shut up, then said, "Or my partner is gonna shoot you." Jim looked over at the woman, and then grinned an evil grin. The man asked, "What money?" Lander balled his fist up and was about to bang the man upside his head when he said, okay, here it is." Jim sweating as he gripped the gun even tighter, Lander took dollar bills and change. "Now get the hell out of here," Lander shouted as he leaped from the truck. The man drove off in a hurry. Jim and Lander cut through the back way of the houses and slid into Lander's back door. Jim damn near forgot to put his rod away as they entered Lander's kitchen where his mother was last seen by them. Then they slowly walked upstairs to Lander's room, panting like two dogs in a heat wave. It was like each of them running the 100-yard dash, trying to outrun each other. The Valiums were beginning to wear off Jim as Jim and Lander counted up $47 and $7 in change. Dope, heroin, was $7 a bag, or they could buy $3 bags. Tray bags, but they had one problem: which one was going up to the pool room to scoop? Jim's brain was already thinking of a route he was going to use to get to the pool room up the shopping center without getting caught. Just then helicopters and police cars were riding and flying up and down in the area where Lander lived. Lights and sirens were sounding loud. Then a knock came at the front door. Jim and Lander froze as Miss Harkins called Lander. They didn't know what to do but cover the money up and go downstairs. "Your sister said she heard you come in," Miss Harkins said. "Mom, didn't you call me?" "Oh yeah, Country is in the living room waiting on you." Halfway down the steps Lander called Country to come upstairs. Country said, "Wow, somebody must have killed someone out there with all those police riding around."
Brothers and sisters, remember the old man Blisters. He worked hard all day, he worked hard all night. Don't let the drug gang take you in tight. Lift up your head, hold it up high, high. We need your love in order to survive. Cause on my block kids are selling dope, 11, 12, and 13. Some say their manhood will never be seen. Try to talk to them, you look like you're crazy. Some to get through to, and some are just lazy. They leave their young girlfriend with habits of babies. To be behind bars is just plain crazy. Doing drugs in the street and not enough to eat. They lie and steal, it's no big deal. Brothers and sisters, remember the old man Blisters. He worked hard all day, he worked hard all night. Don't let the drug gang take you in tight.